Okay, so Darryl, welcome. We usually tap. We don't have scotch in this, so
Thank you.
usually
Yeah,
tap.
we're doing the health thing.
Thank you. That's okay.
We definitely are.
Thank you.
So we're welcoming Darryl Singer, who's a lawyer who does a number of litigation initiatives. You can explain for yourself. But you're Diamond and Diamond, and your practice consists
Yeah,
of.
so I'm a partner at Diamond and Diamond, and I'm the head of the class, as it relates to this, I'm the head of the class actions practice group.
So this is if anybody hasn't figured it out in the first few moments, this is a different podcast than what we normally do. This is in response to events that have unfolded since October 7th with the attack by Hamas into Israel and the murder of civilians. I won't go through what you're hearing on the media, but we, Darryl and I are Jewish. My dad was a Holocaust survivor. My mom happened to be Irish Catholic who converted to Judaism. You're not Jewish, although some people actually think you are.
They do. Everyone does. They think I am, yeah. I'm honorary.
You're honorary.
Yeah,
But, we have all been traumatized by this quite significantly. And we've seen the rise of anti-Semitic crimes go up by over 400%. It was already up by 300%. Prior to October 7th. It's now gone up higher. I've had discussions with people in Toronto Police Service and others, and I'm involved as you are with other and various organizations, and so we're active. But the concern has come from incredible acts of not only anti-Semitic behavior, but vitriol of hatred, destruction of Israel, the annihilation of Jews, and very strong backing on universities from professors and other progressives and intellectuals, basically calling for the end of Israel, calling it colonizer, and the what's that saying, from the river to the sea, right? And one of the challenges I think when you go onto social media, which really we really do need scotch to be on social media.
These days, yeah.
Is because of there's no truth anymore. And we knew there was no truth anymore, going back years. And for those of us, all in law, I mean, part of our podcast in general has been trying to deal with false narratives and wrongful convictions. And we're dealing with a number of very false narratives where you consider it to be somewhat of a distortion of history and truth. Yeah. I consider it to be a deliberate denial of history, reality, and truth, and not wanting to look at what the origins are of many of these arguments and this conflict. To say that Israel's a colonizing state is to say that this isn't a light. Because Israel, Jewish people have been there since before 2000 BC, and Judea and other parts of that area, and have the same claims as anybody else. It's anything but apartheid state. If these people were to spend time in Israel, they'd know that there's a vibrant democracy, not perfect, but there's vibrant democracy. Hopefully there remains an independent judiciary. There are people who are not Jewish, who are citizens of Israel, of Muslim faith and other faiths. There is a party, an Arabic party, who has members in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And prior to this government, I think it was the government before, they were part of the coalition government, which was ruling in Israel. If you go there, you can be treated by a doctor who is of Arab background, Muslim background. They are lawyers, they're doctors. They're involved in all facets of society and the economy. So it's a very poor comparison to try and call it an apartheid state. In any event, we're trying to deal with the truth is something which is extremely difficult. But now what we're seeing is essentially the cauldron of hatred across North America and other parts of the world showing up on our university and college campuses, where we're on really the brink of violence. And as a result of a number of concerns of Israeli Jewish students and other students, Israeli students, etc., of fear on campus, you and your firm have taken some actions. So tell us about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and just give us a sort of short version in English of what the actions are.
Plain non-lawyer language.
Please.
So in simple terms, what we've done, we started to get contacted by students predominantly initially from York University, then from TMU. Now we're seeing students calling us from Concordia, McGill, UBC, Queens, essentially across Dalhousie, across the country. So we've issued 2 class actions thus far, one against TMU and one against York. There will be more coming. These are not new incidents, right? And what the lawsuits, so the class actions essentially say, look, you've got these new flashpoints that have happened recently as a result of, from October 7th forward. And that's layered on top of a history in the case of York, for example, that goes back 15, 20 years. Yeah. It's not new.
None of this is new.
None of this is new. And so we say that these things have caused tremendous damage to the students. What we're hearing now, and I've personally spoken with over 100 students. The lawyers that work for me have spoken combined with, I think, about 400 people as of this afternoon. I was just on a Zoom before I came here with 6 students from another university, and we're hearing the horrible stories of students being. It's gone. The other side will say it's just freedom of speech, but we're talking about, and if I sent you the videos and the pictures that you've seen, we're talking about physical violence. We're talking about spitting, people being spit on, harassment, verbal, just verbal assault, people being followed and screamed at and told they should die because they're a Jew, graffiti all over the universities with things, you can imagine the type of graffiti, but things that basically say like death to the Jews. That's the essence of it. And then not to mention the rallies on campus where their Free Palestine rallies are not really about, and just to be clear, there's nothing in our lawsuit or in my heart or your heart, I imagine, where we're suggesting that students shouldn't have the right to speak out and say, we're really appalled at, we feel sorry for the Palestinians or for the people in Gaza that are dying. We're not suggesting that, but there's a very big difference between saying Free Palestine and from the river to the sea, which is a call to the destruction of Israel. It's a very big difference to say we stand here in support of the people in Gaza that are being bombarded. That's a different story than what they're doing, which is standing there saying death to Israel, death to the Jews, destruction of Israel. They're calling, the BDS movement, for example, which is nothing more than again a call for the destruction of Israel.
What is that?
The divestment movement, the idea, and in the U.S., I think they were successful in a number of years ago in getting certain universities to not invest in any company that had anything to do with Israel. Right. It's essentially to try and put an economic blockade against Israel. So these are all things that are designed that go beyond saying we support Palestinian rights. They're saying in order to support Palestinian rights, we must harm the Jews. We must destroy the Jews.
Yeah, we've moved from what would be a legitimate debate about Israeli policies,
correct,
about Middle East policies, about what solutions are there for conflict, how do we achieve peace. We've moved beyond that to essentially espousing the annihilation of Israel and of the Jewish people.
Well, the flashpoints Darryl's talking about.
But it is so prominent now
in the universities.
Yeah, well, and in protests.
Right.
It's a matter of time before that expands.
This is what gives rise to the lawsuits, right? Is that it's really endemic on university campuses, and the reason is that there's this baked in idea, not with the university administration, with professors and administrators that sort of look the other way when the Jews are the ones being attacked. And what you have, of course, we know that over the last number of years, the universities have become, and I hate to use this term, but people will say they become woke, extremely woke.
No, I use that term in the podcast.
We've used it a few times.
But the reality is, and I have kids as you do, Joe. We have kids at university right now. The fact is that if our children as Jews at that university said or did anything that triggered anybody even if they didn't intend it, if it triggered anybody as a result of their race, their religion, their political beliefs, their disability, what
their pronoun.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Our children would be disciplined, sanctioned, disciplined, possibly. I've done lots of, over the years, as a civil lawyer even, I've done a fair number of these university discipline
tribunal hearings,
tribunal cases. And the things that, as you've seen as well, where they're disciplined for these sorts of relatively minor offenses, if you will. And here you have entire groups rallying on university campuses with the professors supporting them, calling for what is essentially an end to the Jews, and the university administration simply looks the other way. So you have this, so we say in the lawsuits, there's this double standard that's gone on for years. And, unfortunately, one of the things that I was sort of saddened by when the first lawsuit, the York lawsuit, was picked up by the media, they really, as the media often does, picks on what they think is important. And so, the headlines scream, $15 million class action. But if you actually read the lawsuit, that's not the focus of it, right?
It's not about money.
It's not about money.
And
there has to be a damages claim to have the lawsuit.
It's a civil lawsuit in Ontario. You've got to ascribe a dollar amount to it. But the lawsuit is actually seeking what we call injunctive relief. We're saying you've got to, first of all, there are policies on campus that are only being enforced against Jews, but not for them. And we're saying those policies ought to be enforced. And that includes things like, in the York case, dechartering the York Federation of Students. It includes things like disciplining, whether it's a suspension or an expulsion, against students who commit anti-Jewish acts of hate. And then the implementation of newer, more fully developed policies to ensure the protection of Jewish students. And that's what these lawsuits are about. And I've spent, as I say, the last 3 weeks listening to students tell us these horrible stories of what's going on campus. And unfortunately, we've had to start these lawsuits as what we call John Doe and Jane Doe lawsuits, because I've got lots of students who are saying, I'm happy to come forward, but I still go to this school and I take a class with a professor who's told me that he hates Israel. I can't put my name on that lawsuit. So we've had to issue these lawsuits as John Doe lawsuits for the protection of the students. That's and the only other case, I've practiced civil litigation for 30 years, and the only other time that I've ever used a John Doe or Jane Doe claim in a lawsuit is where I'm dealing with a historic sexual assault victim who's suing for damages.
Complainant.
A complainant.
Sorry. You've had the bloods in us for this podcast.
Yeah. So right. We have a different view of that. But anyway. So, and in cases, I do a fair amount of anti-racism cases against school boards, and I'm dealing with, kids that are minors. And so in those instances, we also use the anonymization. But other than that, I mean, so that's the category. Like, just so you understand the category that these Jewish students are in, they find themselves in the same category as a sexual assault victim who says, I need to come forward and seek redress, but I can't do it. I can't put my name forward because I'm so terrified.
Well, I mean, they're in. Look, we know of outside of the curriculum, there are lectures being given by professors, particularly focusing on Israel and the colonization and the apartheid and all that other garbage, which is not part of the curriculum. And you know where your professor stands on it. And if you're coming out to say anything or do anything, you're going to be with your grades, never mind anything else. But we're also talking about professors here too, who are coming out and saying things which are either on social media or at university campuses, which essentially endanger Jewish students as well. This is incredibly insidious and at a level of hatred that I haven't seen.
Well, here's an interesting thing, just to explain how crazy these professors have gotten. I spoke,
not all of them, but a number who've spoken out.
I spoke with a student yesterday, a university student yesterday afternoon, who had a professor speaking out against Israel, encouraging people to go to one of these anti-Israel rallies, because that's what they are. We ought not to call them pro-Palestinian rallies. They're anti-Israel rallies, and that's what the media ought to be calling them. But this professor was encouraging students in the class to go out and participate in this anti-Israel rally. Here's the interesting thing. He was a math professor. So you understand at a place like York, where you're talking about a history professor, a poli-sci professor, we may disagree, but there's some nexus to the course. Like the discussion might come out organically in a political science course. This is a math class, a math professor. There's no way that conversation occurs organically in the context of that class.
No, and this, there was a student who we've been contacted about at a university where they have a sports management program, and a substitute professor came in, and it was not about sports management. Right. And it, the one thing that I think, in addition to your lawsuit, which, it's obvious that a number of these professors and students and student organizations and many of those students at TMU have not read the terrorism provisions of the criminal code. They've obviously missed Section 83, because when you're endorsing the acts of a terrorist organization who's already committed atrocities which are clearly terrorist acts, and you're saying they're justified and that more should continue for the freedom of Palestinians, they're committing terrorism. And that's something which I think, our media certainly doesn't give a shit about, at least as BJ would say, our legacy media, who love to have their own fake news. BJ, welcome. Our senior producer here, and there's a lot of bullshit narratives out there, but we'll make no bones about it. We're getting information that's being collated and gathered with respect to evidence, videos, and recordings, and all this stuff, and it has crossed the line into criminal conduct. And if there was another group saying this about an identifiable group other than Israelis or Jews, they'd be arrested by now.
Correct.
And so they have not read these provisions. But you can be sure of one thing: we are advising these politicians and police services now, and reminding them and educating them about these provisions. It's bad.
Well, particularly when we talk to students on campus, as I have recently, where there have been physical assaults, and there's absolutely no repercussion. The police are not even called.
I was going to say, no police involvement?
Well, there was reports,
But again, that if it was the reverse, that the police would be there and an arrest would be made.
Well,
can I tell you a story that happened not just at a university?
Tell me, but I have some pretty good information from a good source about police, and I'll talk about it in a moment, but go ahead.
So we're seeing this not only at the universities, we're also seeing it, I mentioned earlier that I do a lot of anti-racism cases against school boards. I've been contacted by people, particularly from the York Region School Board, parents of kids there, and there's a particularly awful story that I heard that took place last week on Thursday or Friday at one of the high schools, where a group of students, not all of them, by the way, were Palestinian, but they were all anti-Jewish and had made all kinds of remarks, offensive, hateful, clearly remarks that we would categorize as hate speech in the classroom. A couple of Jewish students stood up for themselves and responded, and the Jewish students were asked to leave the class and were ultimately suspended.
Well, that doesn't shock me.
No, it was So that's what's going on, right? Not just at that level.
Look, when we were at York in 1991,
it was a very different environment.
But we did know that if you were to say certain things, certain professors would look at you differently, and you could bet your grades would be quite different.
For sure.
But again, so what you're hoping to do is to get these universities to form policies, which they should, and they have an obligation to create a safe environment for all students.
Correct.
Not just all students, but Jewish students.
Well, that's the essence of the lawsuits, and that's the goal.
let's talk in transition for a moment about TMU's law school, and about students who've come out who said things that have crossed the line, and there's some professors at a law. There's a professor at a certain law school. The Law Society seems to be fairly silent to some extent about how we deal with this as a governing body when there is essentially promoting of terrorist acts. There's no other way to say it.
And I'll tell you, I'm really, really angry about that. I mean, there's no other word other than anger. We have seen our Law Society in Ontario put out all kinds of press releases when they think there's a human rights abuse halfway around the world affecting some relatively minor group that has no connection to, or a very tenuous connection here, but certainly doesn't impact us. And they're the first ones on the bandwagon to put it out. We know that our Law Society spends an awful lot of time drilling this concept of equity and diversity and forcing us to take CPD courses in equity and diversity, and making us, as you, of course, as an owner of a firm know, you got to fill out that form every year that says you've got an equity. Look, well, and hold on. But then they are odd. They have been oddly silent. They did not come out and condemn Hamas. And more importantly, they then didn't come out and condemn either the law students at TMU or the various law professors who have spewed hate. And particularly these 75 students who signed this letter at TMU, this is the next generation of lawyers. And so you've got a group of people out there. First of all, it concerns me, quite aside from the hate, Joe, and Mike, it concerns me because one of the hallmarks we would look for, whether it's you or I, or in hiring an articling student or a young lawyer, is somebody who's able to competently have knowledge and judgment. And so for somebody at that level to have such a complete, whether I call it a distortion, you call it a denial of history, concerns me about their ability to exercise proper judgment as a lawyer. But more importantly, to be spewing hate counters is really in contravention of our professional ethics. And we see, I can tell you, I do a lot of work defending lawyers and doing good character hearings at the Law Society Tribunal. I've seen an awful lot of people hauled before that tribunal for far less. And yet our Law Society is very, very silent on this. And it concerns me. And it sends a message to me, and it should send the same message to you as a Jewish lawyer, that they simply don't care about us as Jews.
Or are scared.
So hang on, give us an example. Like, our viewers may not know what the content was, for example, what the students wrote. Can you give us a little thumbnail?
So, Phil, have you seen the letter?
Sadly.
Yes, so have I. So the letter, it's more of the same of what we've been talking about. They're basically, in simple terms, they're calling for the destruction of Israel.
Look,
and they put their names to it.
They were talking about, of course, supporting the Palestinian cause, and about the illegitimate policies of Israel. I don't want to read it because I don't want to.
They did use words like colonizer, genocide,
they've used those same
apartheid
type of comments. The difficulty with what they've said is that when you take it as a whole, it really does, again, advocate for the elimination of the state of Israel. And it is done in a fervor and a rhetoric which is offensive, but also threatening to Jewish lawyers, to Jewish students, and to the Jewish community. Everybody's free speech. BJ and I have these arguments sometimes about absolutism when it comes to free speech. But again, this is one of those areas where I talk about speech has crossed the line into hate speech, and in certain cases into criminal acts of terrorism. But this one's particularly bad. And let's just stop for one moment. You talk about competence. It goes beyond that. As lawyers, we swear an oath. Our oath is to do our job and to take on clients, and not to be so selective about clients. I mean, we have an obligation to take on files, and those of us who practice criminal law have dedicated our careers to representing everybody who comes from any walk of life, any race, any religion. We've represented the vilified, the most vulnerable, the most hated, and that's our job, and we do it to the best of our abilities, 12, 13, 14 hour a day dedicated to these people because we care. We care about rights. I have taken seriously, diversity. Our firm is like, I'm the only Jewish member of my firm. We have people from everywhere and different religions. But this isn't about that.
Right.
This is about a defined group who is being targeted and will see violence against them. And we need our institutions to speak up and stand out when they're not. And these students, good luck with their futures, but I think that university law school is in deep trouble now.
Do you have the names?
We have the names.
Yeah, we have. I have them too.
We all have the names.
We all have the names.
Everybody has the names, and like, make no mistake about it. There are lots of very high-profile lawyers, both Jewish and non-Jewish, who are pulling their funding of TMU, who are pulling their awards, bursaries and all sorts of things. So they're going to see a considerable amount of defunding.
Well, it's not just the defunding. There's also going to be a disengagement, right? Because TMU is now called, operates on this practice school model.
Yeah, I know.
So there's almost like a co-op kind of thing, and firms that are signed up for that are pulling out and are going to pull out, and these students are going to have trouble getting jobs as a result of this.
And you have to, this is something that people have to understand about lawyers. We have to take on cases that we may not agree with sometimes. We have obligations to represent people. Correct. And we need lawyers, and people don't like lawyers, but we are an essential part of a democratic society. And then if you have people with such strong views against a religion, you can't trust them as lawyers. And the Law Society doesn't speak up about this. So tell us, are there other targeted lawsuits coming out?
There are a number of other universities coming up. Watch for those in the coming days.
I can tell you that there's other groups, one of which that I'm a part of, where there will be other lawsuits coming. And
any Law Society complaints? Any Law Society complaints?
There has been a few Law Society complaints launched. I'm not sure where they'll go.
Yeah, I'm not aware of those.
There's been one or two. But to us, it's just disappointing. Whether the Law Society makes this statement or not, I find it disappointing. And it's sad because at a time of need, this would be something of comfort that we would like from an organization that we work with for our whole careers. But I guess when it gets down to it, it's just when I talk about a denial, it's there's a British columnist and political journalist in England who put it really well. Israel is the only state or country that's not allowed to win a war, and it's shocking to see how the UN has reacted with their resolution. It mentioned nothing about
shocking,
Hamas.
But not surprising, because that's historically consistent with how
it is,
the
but
UN
I
has
have to
dealt
say
with
it was, this time it was particularly poignantly upsetting and galling. In 1948, when the Israeli state was created, with those pre-67 borders, they were welcomed by a war. The British pulled out, there was a war. This is history. I'm not sure how many people out there want to recognize that. And then Israel was successfully able to defend. Another significant war in 1967, and that's when the borders changed in 1973. Israel's not allowed to win a war and keep some land. And it's not necessarily that they want to keep some of this land. It's a question of protection. But that has been the welcome that they received. And the absolute unequivocal denial of history. And when that asshole head of the UN talks about this didn't happen without a context, you.
Right.
I'd like to see what country you're from, and people go in there and cut babies' heads off and rape women and burn people in their homes alive and you come out and make that statement after that happened to your people.
But again, coming from the UN, that's what we've come, as Jews, what we've come to expect.
I need some help with this, because this is a good point. Is it the Human Rights Committee?
UNRWA.
In the UN, who's going to be the head of that next?
Oh, probably Iran.
It is going to be Iran.
I mean, they're on the board. They're on the panel.
No, but I think they're the ones to head the.
Quite a delicious irony, right?
I mean, it's and then the other thing which these professors and these students, maybe unknowingly or knowingly, feed into the overall geopolitical plans of Iran, who wants to destabilize and keep the Middle East destabilized. They have zero interest in peace. They have zero interest in the plight of the Palestinian people. They have zero interest in a two-state solution. They want Israel not to have a peace accord with Saudi Arabia, and it feeds into some extent into Russian ambitions to destabilize the geopolitical situation, who've been welcoming leaders from Hamas and from Iran, and they have strategic alliance for their own weapons for their illegal war with Ukraine. And what these learned professors and students don't get is they are feeding into a chaotic world order. A world order where they're not going to find a place of safety or free speech. You want to give that speech in Russia, you want to give that speech in Iran, good luck. You want to give that lecture, good luck. You want to protest there, good luck. I mean, the atrocities we've seen in Iran is horrible. Same with Russia, which is now a closed society. And they just don't get it, that they are doing damage and doing exactly... I mean, the Hamas leaders, those of them that are still alive at the moment, are laughing. They're going, oh, look at these white privileged students and these learned professors. They're doing our jobs. I mean, we should have them on payroll. It's shocking that there is an absolute denial for what this world is in for.
What I've tried to understand, and I don't have the answer, is how did we get to the point in North America where the Jews were the bad guys?
Well, we always have been.
But it's gotten worse. Certainly in our lifetime, it's gotten significantly worse.
BJ?
I could talk for 45 minutes on this and explain it all to you.
How about a 5-minute, 3-minute comment on that one?
My business before I was doing podcasts was on a university campus. So
I
saw this happen. I know all the reasons why, but it's predominantly...
Do you want to come out the camera for a sec?
No, the adaptation of postmodernism within university campuses. So it's oppressor versus oppressed. They identified the Jews as the oppressors. They've created this whole frame. And the problem we do is we use the word Palestine, which hands them the argument because we're jumping into their frame. Yeah. And then we try to win the argument with facts. We're never going to win this way.
So here's the argument that I'm trying to win with certain people, including, in some cases, certain people in my own house. How did we get to a point where the Jewish youth, some of the Jewish youth, are on their side, are against Israel, are against us as Jews? How did we get to that point?
Well, because
I don't
they fed
understand
into that same
and how do we get them out of it? Like, how do we deprogram these Jewish kids and make them understand that they're at risk? I mean, as you know, as we always say, you know, if the trains come for us again, the fact that you're a Jewish kid who might side with the Palestinians ain't going to save you. You're getting on the train with the rest of us, right?
But here's the thing. The argument that they are indoctrinated in through high school and university is exactly what BJ is talking about, and it impacts them because they don't read. If you ask these students, tell me the history.
They don't know.
Of Israel. Tell me the history of conflict.
They don't know.
Who
don't know?
When Gaza, that land, which country did that belong to originally?
They do not know the
answer. It was Egypt.
Right.
What about the West Bank? It was Jordan. Which country has the majority of Palestinians? Jordan. When the Palestinians were in Jordan, I'm not saying the ones who are there now, but the PLO and other groups, they wanted to overthrow King Hussein, the older King Hussein, and he had enough of that, and there was a massacre. and then push them back into the West Bank and cut it off. Ask them about this history. Ask them about that massacre. They won't know.
But there's a bigger problem. Hold on.
Just one more thing.
Yeah.
And in the framing of the argument, what bothers me, it's Palestinian versus Israel, Palestinian versus Jew, or Muslim, and that's not what it is.
Right.
And that's not what it is, because we have many friends who are Muslim. We have many friends who are Palestinian. There are many Palestinians who work within Israel. 30,000 would come over from Gaza every day. There was Israeli companies investing in Gaza with Palestinian employees. They all want a mutual relationship. They all want to get along. They all want peace. I'm not justifying a government that was in power at this time in Israel, politics as it is. But the framing of the argument is what feeds into what the universities have had, but feeds into what these destabilizing countries want to do. There are people who are here, who are in the United States and who are in Europe, who are underneath lighting the match and creating these narratives, and they're just gobbling it up, because that's not the way it should be framed.
But the bigger problem is when you try to educate these Jewish kids who are on the wrong side of this and don't understand history, and you try to, and again, I hope one of you could tell me how to deal with this.
Send them to Israel.
Because what happens is you say to these kids, these are the facts, right? As you've described, I've had these conversations with some of these kids where I've said, these are the facts. What about, why are you not blaming Egypt? Why are you not blaming Jordan? Why, these are the facts. This is the history.
Not even blaming them.
But they
taking
say,
into consideration the history,
but what
the dynamics.
Right, and they say, because we live in this post-truth world, they say, well, that's your story. That's your history. That's what you believe. But I believe something different.
Yeah. That's what we That's what we deal with in our normal podcast when we deal about wrongful convictions. It's when I get vilified to say, well, there are false allegations, and I get all sorts of hate mail. It's the same thing.
Can I add something, Joseph?
Yeah.
Because
I'm delighted you're here.
Well, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
It's the voice.
Likewise, we, as I mentioned before, you're going back to talking to them about the facts. That's never going to work. You need to persuade them. And one of the things that I do is when they talk, they chant "from the river to the sea." What's the phrase before that they often but don't always say? You know what it is? We don't want 50. We want 58 states. We don't want 2 states. What does that mean?
Yes.
Ask them what that means.
Right.
Have them explain it to you, because that's the 57 states in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and they want a 58th state. So those sorts of persuasion tactics you can use. That's the only way we're going to win.
If they'll even bother thinking about it. But it's a very interesting thing.
And when I say win, by the way, I mean the Western world. I don't mean Israel, because that is just a step towards more extremism in societies beyond the Middle East.
But this gets down to a core of the fact that we have lost sight of truth.
Yes.
When you talk about my truth, your truth, I mean...
Subjectivism.
Subjectivism, we're f***ed. Because it permeates us in criminal law with what we do in your litigation, and now it's permeating into your homes with opinions and politics, and we're heading down a very, very dangerous road. We'll have you back to give us an update on these lawsuits, and thank you for doing that. Thank you for coming.
Thanks,
you look very good today.
Thank you. Not as good as you.
That's true.
The people...
Just kidding. I'm kidding. You're very snappy.
For the 30 years that I've known Joe Neuberger. 30? Well, it's more, because 35 years almost that I've known Joe. I've always said, when I grow up, I want to be as good looking as Joe Neuberger.
Thanks for coming on.
I love you, pal. All right,
everybody, thank you. If you like this, well, hold on, sit down.
Oh, we're not done.
Sit down. Oh. It's okay, this can stay in there.
Honorary pillow.
Yeah, well, whatever. If you like our podcast, share, subscribe, hit notification. You can send us questions about this, but thank you for coming out.
Good
night, everybody.
Thank you.